Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm wrapping up all the books I read in July, which turned out to be a pretty strong reading month for me in terms of quantity, although I think my ratings were kind of all over the board. I think for the purposes of not repeating myself too much, we're going to start with the one book I didn't read for a vlog, because I did do a Summerween vlog and a Spooky Houses vlog this month. I'll link those in the cards up above if you want to check out my longer thoughts on the books. But we'll start with the one book I didn't read for either of those vlogs, and then I'll try and do kind of a quick rating and a couple of thoughts for the rest. So the one book I didn't read for a vlog this month was The Gathering by C.J. Tudor, which I just picked up on a whim at the library when I went in to pick up a different hold. And this ended up being, I think, my favorite book I read this month. Gave it 4.5 stars, but this one is following a woman named Barbara Atkins, who is a specialist in vampire anthropology, and she's also a homicide detective. She lives in a version of our world where vampires are a known thing. They live in colonies in various places, typically in kind of rural areas. And they're highly regulated by the government. They're treated as like a minority group, but they're not allowed to be hunted, so that is one half of it. But on the other side of it, they're not allowed to get jobs or seek education of any kind. So the vampire colonies are very much like self-sufficient and very much villainized as well. And we're following Barbara as she's traveling to Alaska to look at a case where a young man has apparently been killed by a vampire, and the town wants her to authorize a cull, where the government will say, okay, you can legally hunt this particular colony because they're a threat to the people living in the area. So the townspeople want her to authorize a cull because they believe a vampire killed this young man, but she thinks that there's something more complicated going on and starts really digging into the case and gets caught up in those tensions between the townspeople who want to kill the vampires and the vampires who have just recently returned to the area after having been driven out after a similar killing 25 years ago. So it's really interesting because I love the police procedural aspect of this, where she's very much cut off from her resources. She doesn't have access to forensics and everything, so it's very much old school detective techniques. She's trying to find contradictions in what people are saying. She's using kind of her instincts and her knowledge of vampires, given her background, to peel apart all the different layers. I thought that was really fun. I really liked the police procedural element. But it's also the tensions between the people in the town and the vampires in the nearby colony, and the ways that they have this very complicated history with each other. There's a lot of violence and bloodshed between them, a lot of hatred on either side, and she just kind of gets caught in the middle of it as each side is trying to advocate for their point of view. And there's also religious tensions in the town, and the book also kind of discusses a little bit the legal limitations that are placed on vampires, and this idea that it's easy for people in cities where vampires don't typically live to be very pro vampire rights, but then there's people in these rural towns who are but the wolf is at our door, you're advocating against us. So she's there's that dynamic, and then there's also the dynamic of the vampires being denied any access to work or education or a lot of other resources. So I think it does a really interesting job of making a world where vampires are a thing realistic, and kind of grappling with the difficulties of that, of there is this group that is in existence that is proven very dangerous. They can kill people, but they're not also evil. So I thought that was a really interesting take on it, because I've read some other books that kind of deal with that. I think the one thing that really pops to mind for me is the Sookie Stackhouse series, the Vampires or the Vampire Mysteries. Those ones have a world where vampires are kind of integrating, and they are allowed to basically do whatever a human does. But that series never really kind of convincingly grapples with the fact that the vampires are actually killing people in various circumstances. I feel like this did a much more realistic version of that, and it made everybody in here really complex and really interesting. There were really nuanced conversations about the laws surrounding vampires, so I really appreciated the way this book tackled that, and I just had a great time with it. Overall, the reason I gave this 4.5 instead of 5 stars is that I think the ending is kind of rushed. A lot of this is a kind of slow building tension as everything is kind of coming to a head in the town. There's also this slow unraveling of the mystery. So I think we get a lot of build-up and a lot of detail, and then it feels a little bit like we just kind of get an info dump right at the very end that wraps a bunch of the questions in little bows, and I didn't feel like that worked quite as well for the pace of the story and for the information that we were learning. So I was a little frustrated with the ending, but on the whole, I really enjoyed this. And the last page, there's a little epilogue, suggests that there might be a series coming. So I would happily read more of this. I really love Barbara as a main character. I thought her backstory was interesting. I really like the way that she handled all of the obstacles that were thrown in her path, and it just was a really, really good time. So highly, highly recommend this if you like a police procedural specifically. I think if you don't like that particular kind of story, this one may not work as well for you. So now we're going to backtrack to the vlogs, because The Gathering is actually the last book I read this month, and at the very start of the month I was working on my Summerween vlog. So first for that, I read Horror Store by Grady Hendrix, which I believe I gave 3 stars. This is basically like Haunted IKEA, but it's like knockoff IKEA, and it was a really interesting concept, but I feel like some of what it was pulling from didn't make sense. It's tying itself to a specific historical period in a way that doesn't really work, and it's like involving a panopticon, which is a very specific kind of prison where like surveillance is really important, and that isn't really a part of the horror. So it didn't totally work for me. I think it was a little bit messy and a little bit underdeveloped. It wasn't quite as thought out as I would like it to be, but overall I would say the characters were interesting and I liked the general gist of the storyline, and some of the horror moments were actually really scary. Then I read Strange Pictures by Uketsu, and I really liked this one. I think I gave it 4 stars. This is a really fun mystery. I would say it's much more mystery than horror, where we're following different people as they're trying to piece together the events tied to these creepy drawings, and all the drawings are very different. The ways that the people are working through them are all very different, and I liked the way that all of the different sections slowly tied together, so we got this like much bigger mystery and much bigger picture of what was going on. I just thought this was really clever and really fun, and I tore through this in just a couple days. It was a really good time. Then I read Ling Hun by Ai Zhang, which I think I gave 2.5 stars. The writing in here is really interesting, but I think it's mostly pretty forgettable, and it just didn't quite work for me. Everything feels like you're kind of at arm's length from all the characters, and it raises a lot of interesting ideas without really coming back to them or developing them in any way. This is about a town where you go when you want to be haunted, so it's very much like a story about grief, and we're following 2 characters who have interesting roles within their family as a result of their family's grief over the loss of one of their siblings, and it's interesting conceptually, but I don't think it was executed very well. Then we had Tomie by Junji Ito, which I really liked, but it's a little repetitive. I think I gave this 3.5 stars. It's, like I said, it's pretty repetitive. You're kind of reading the same story over and over again. We're following Tomie, who is this girl who cannot be killed, or every time she's killed, she regenerates from one of her body parts, and she inspires this desire to like kill and dismember her in anybody that she interacts with, specifically men. And it just started to feel a little bit samey for the first half. I think the second half gets better. There is one story I really liked that I think is called Adopted Daughter, that's about Tomie and this older couple that she interacts with, and I felt like the later stories were a little bit more creative, were a little bit more unique, and I liked that a little bit better. Overall, though, it was just a lot of the same. Finally, for Summerween, I read The Last Final Girl by Stephen Graham Jones, which I really liked. I think I gave this 3.5 or 4 stars. This is structured like it's a movie script, so you're reading through it as if it's a movie script. It's got like scene directions and descriptions of how the camera would move through something. I thought it was a really interesting idea conceptually. It just made it a little bit hard to follow, especially because there were quite a few characters, so it felt like it was a little hard to remember like who was who and how they were connected to each other. I think that this would work as a really awesome movie. I could imagine a movie that was this, but I think that because of the way it was written, it's a little bit hard to follow what's going on. I also felt like some of the like twists are really obvious. That said, some of the horror in here, kind of similar to Horror Store, has some really excellent like horror moments that are really memorable and really gruesome in interesting ways. So I think this is overall an interesting story, but definitely one you're more likely to enjoy if you already kind of like Stephen Graham Jones' work. And finally, we're getting into the second vlog I did, which was the Spooky Houses vlog. So I ended up reading How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix first. I read a lot of Grady Hendrix in the last month-ish, because I read Southern Book Club in June, at the very end of June, and then read 2 Grady Hendrix for July. This one is my least favorite, though, by far. I really didn't like this one. I think the main characters are both wildly unpleasant and unreasonable people, and I don't know that that is intentional, but I definitely thought they were both massively immature, and they're both supposed to be like almost 40, and the way they were behaving was just driving me nuts. So I hated that part, and then I also felt like the horror lacked kind of consistent internal logic. It was just whatever was convenient for the plot to move forward, meaning that the villain ended up feeling really overpowered at various points in ways that didn't make a lot of sense. Our two main characters, Louise and Mark, make a lot of really dumb decisions. My favorite one being Louise setting down a hammer when they know they're about to face something really scary. So of course the hammer is not in her hand, so she can't defend herself, but it is available for the villain to pick up. And I just found that really frustrating, the way that they kept doing stupid shit like that. And it did not work for me at all. And I think it's a kind of interesting meditation on, like, grief and the loss of family, but that's probably the most interesting part and ultimately not even really the core focus of a lot of the book. Like, it is the core focus of the book. The book is divided into the different stages of grief, but I think it gets kind of overshadowed by all of the other nonsense. After that, I picked up, we'll go with this one next, Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt. I kind of read both of these at the same time, but this one was another one that was kind of disappointing. I think I gave this 2 stars. This is a book about trauma and fascism and a house, a spooky house, following 2 women who several years ago went into the house with a friend of theirs, and the 2 women left, but the friend did not manage to escape the house, and so now 3 years later they're coming back to try and figure out what happened to her. And this one had a number of major issues for me. Big one was the plot pacing. For what I can say that there was a plot, there wasn't really a lot of plot, but the pacing of it was very strange. The whole, like, first half of the book is before the characters even start interacting with each other again. We spend a lot of time individually with Alice and Illa, and learning about them and their lives, like, subsequent to the house, how the house has continued to impact them in the year since they visited it. But then, like, the summary on the back tells me they're going to the house to find their friend Hannah. They don't get to the house until the last 40 pages, and I don't feel bad telling you that, because I think I would have liked to have known that going in. There is a section where we get, like, a flashback of their first experience in the house, and I think that was, for me, the most interesting part of the whole story. But overall, this gets very bogged down in its own message. It's very much about trauma and fascism, but I feel like it's almost too over the top. It's more focused on kind of blatant displays of fascism and of racism and misogyny and transphobia. We have one woman who is a trans woman and one woman who is a TERF. That's the setup at the start. And it just is so much just slurs and violence, and it doesn't feel purposeful or meaningful in any way for a lot of it. It's just a lot of unpleasant language and unpleasant imagery for the sake of having unpleasant language and unpleasant imagery. So it just didn't work for me. I know a lot of people did really enjoy this when it first came out. I did see a lot of positive reviews on Goodreads, but this very much did not work for me because I feel like it just gets bogged down in its own ideas around trauma and fascism. And it's not interested in being subtle in any way. It's very much England is the house and the house is fascism. And finally, we're ending with a book I did enjoy. Not quite as much as the other one by this author, but I read Strange Houses this month as well by Yuketsu. And this one I liked a little bit less. I think I gave it like 3.5 stars. I think it was 3.5. This one's pretty fun. I just don't feel like it is as cleverly written as the first book. This one we're following the author himself is a character in this, and a fictional friend, I assume, named Kurihara, who is an architect. And the two of them get asked to look at some floor plans. Rather, Yuketsu gets asked to look at some floor plans, and he pulls Kurihara into the situation. And the floor plans are kind of weird at first, but, like, the more they look at them, the creepier they get. And they start to unravel this bigger mystery about, like, the purpose of the house, which I thought that part was really interesting, but I think that the ultimate, like, answer to what's going on is really kind of convoluted and complex, and they hit on the correct answer way too easily. And I thought it was really interesting that it's the architect coming up with the story, not the author. So it's this weird dynamic between the two of them where a lot of it is Kurihara going, oh, actually it's this, and, like, explaining things to Yuketsu for most of the book. And I just felt like it was too easy. They come to the right answer too easily, and it's too complex for that to work. So these are all of the books that I read in July. Let me know down in the comments below if you read any of them and what you thought about them. And that's pretty much it. That's what I've got for you today. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, I hope you consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and hope to see you in the next video. Bye.